Hello, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video, I want to talk to you about what is a disruptive innovation and why it is somewhat problematic to think about a person that is doing or working on disruptive innovations as a disruptive entrepreneur. If you don't know, I'm actually a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. And what I'm going to do in this video is define what a disruptive innovation is and then get into some of these particular reasons why it's somewhat problematic to think of somebody as a disruptive entrepreneur, or whether they can actually become a disruptive whether they can actually suggest that they're actually working on a disruptive innovation. So Clayton Christensen, a few years ago, I think it was 1995, when he coined this particular term, but there was lots of people that were working on this within the academic literature. There's lots of people that have been working on this particular idea, but a disruptive innovation refers to an innovation that is generally inferior to some sort of degree when it first starts out, right? So in a marketplace, it is some sort of new technology, new product, new idea, new service, something like that, that is generally really inferior. It's not really good in any sort of way. It doesn't serve the customer needs very well. And most people actually disregard it. But then over time, the technological trajectory, it improves so much and people start adopting it so much that it actually overtakes and creates a new particular marketplace. It overtakes the sustaining innovation that currently exists in the marketplace. Now, there's lots of different examples of this particular idea of a disruptive innovation. Things like Wikipedia, for example. So if you think about traditional encyclopedias, it's kind of the sustaining innovation. And there was people that were going door to door trying to sell you encyclopedias, but then Wikipedia came along when it first started out. I remember actually when it first started out, I was paying attention to it. It wasn't, because I was pretty young, right? So I'm 38 right now. So when it first came out, I was in my early 20s. And it was not very good, and lots of people discounted it. But now it is the de facto encyclopedia that exists. In fact, I don't even think you can actually buy paper encyclopedias now. It might be interesting if somebody does have that. If you can actually purchase that, you can let me know. Be curious to see. Other things like YouTube, for example, YouTube is completely disrupting traditional media. If you haven't noticed, there's lots of cord cutters out there. And one of the reasons why there are these cord cutters, people that are not watching, traditional cable television or, having a traditional TV, is because of things like YouTube. You can actually watch some really interesting and fantastic stuff on YouTube now, and it's just people actually doing their thing, and people discounted that heavily when it first started out, that this was actually going to be a legitimate form of media, right? People just thought the quality was going to be terrible. Yes, the quality is not generally very good compared to what you can produce in a studio. Like right now, I'm actually producing this in my house. On my laptop, it's not necessarily the best technology but at the same time, it's actually pretty useful stuff, right? Other things like the LED, right? When LED screens first were introduced, there were just green calculator screens that were just not very good. But then over time, they improved substantially to overtake the cathode ray tube. The Ford Model T is another one that replaced the Horse and Carriage, for example, where people couldn't even imagine that that people would not use a horse and carriage. But then the Model T came along and, completely replaced the horse and carriage. So generally, the sustaining innovation, the thing that currently exists, is sort of embedded within the current infrastructure within society, right? So lots of people are going to defend that particular innovation. They can't necessarily see any particular options other than that particular innovation or that particular technology. And a lot of people are not really going to pay attention to the disruptive innovation. But then when the disruptive innovation comes in, it usually is from outside the market. Maybe it is from created by somebody that is completely, it's just not part of what people would imagine, right? It's just not outside, or it's just not sort of part of how you normally understand that particular technology. And then few people sort of pay attention to it and discount it when it first comes out. And then eventually, because of rapid rates of adoption over time and learning curve effects, so the technology actually gets better, that it actually replaces the sustaining innovation. So why do I actually think that you can't necessarily call yourself a disruptive entrepreneur? This is a term that is sort of thrown around or sort of thrown about as somebody that is doing something that's pretty novel, right? Like somebody like Elon Musk, for example, that is doing something that is pretty novel. The trouble is that it is very difficult to forecast who is going to be a disruptive entrepreneur or not. Generally, for every one disruptive innovation that actually becomes a very good innovation that we know about, there are probably thousands out there that people have tried and it didn't necessarily work out. And we don't necessarily call those people that have tried that particular disruptive innovation as somebody that is a disruptive entrepreneur, right? We normally think of the ones that sort of change the marketplace as a disruptive entrepreneur. So we're missing out on a lot of different people when we sort of think of disruptive entrepreneurs and people that have tried something, or maybe they had a great idea and they didn't sort of execute it on it in the right way. And they just kind of, went in a different direction, right? So we normally don't think of that. The issue is that there's a lot of chance involved. And, people like that are very smart and do a lot of investing in this area, like venture capitalists, for example, they know this. That's why they don't sort of pick one disruptive entrepreneur, and give them a bunch of money. They spread it around to many different people, and they're sort of thinking about, what is actually going to take off here? What is it that takes off? And if 1 out of 100 takes off, well, that's pretty good odds, right? That's not too bad. So you can't necessarily call yourself a disruptive entrepreneur if the outcomes are not necessary, or the how you define yourself is in terms of whether you actually became sort of successful in a marketplace. So you gotta sort of pay attention to that. The other thing, and this is really important that a lot of people neglect, is that a disruptive innovation is at a fundamentally different level of analysis. Well, what do I mean then about that than becoming an entrepreneur? Well, a disruptive innovation is thinking about something on sort of the technology side or the technological trajectory. And what you're doing is you're actually following maybe it's a mass of people or a group of people, a cluster of people. It's a cluster of firms over time, and how that is sort of changing in the marketplace and how that's sort of evolving in the marketplace. It is not one particular person that is performing that particular task. It might be led by one person, but that is unlikely. Usually it is a sort of group of people or a group of companies that are investing in a particular thing. And then as well, it's also the customers that are accepting that particular innovation and sort of feeding into that innovation, why it actually gets a little bit better over time, right? So it's not necessarily the disruptive entrepreneur sort of leading the pack in any way. It is more of what's going on with the innovation itself and the technological trajectory itself. So it's just not at the right level of analysis in terms of understanding, how those disruptive innovations actually come about. And the third thing that I think is important that people seem to really neglect, and this sort of related to my first point, is that disruptive innovations, we have to remember that they are terrible at the beginning, right? So most people are not going to associate themselves with a terrible innovation that necessarily just doesn't really serve the market very well, right? So most people are going to discount that. They're going to say, this is terrible, and they're not going to call themselves a disruptive entrepreneur if they're doing that particular technology, right? They're only going to call themselves a disruptive entrepreneur if they are actually working on something that is becoming successful. And there is, in general, when it starts out, it's not good in any sort of way. Wikipedia really was not good when it was first launched, but it took years of people inputting and adding all of this content to Wikipedia before it actually become very good and very useful to a lot of people, right? And it actually became accurate. And if you were to call yourself, if he was, if at the time when, and I'm blanking on his name, I apologize if you watch this video, if you're the founder of Wikipedia, I apologize. Anyways, when he created Wikipedia, it wasn't good when it first started out, right? But it only took years before it actually became better over time. And it would have been an awkward thing to call yourself a disruptive entrepreneur if you're working on something that just wasn't all that good. The last thing is, when you are talking about a disruptive entrepreneur, what you're doing is you're actually, because of this whole problem with the level of analysis I mentioned before, you're actually focusing on the particular technology rather than on the sort of problem that you're trying to solve. And this is probably misdirected efforts in terms of what you're trying to do as an entrepreneur. So if you're watching this, you're an entrepreneur, you should be gearing and focusing on solving a particular problem that is sort of that needs to be solved. It is not the particular technology that you're trying to create that is important. It is the thing that you're trying to solve, and it's usually some sort of problem that you and many other people have that you're trying to solve. And initially that you're not doing a very good job with the solution that you're providing, but over time it actually gets better because of the input of the customers, and as well as what you are doing to solve that particular problem over time. So that's really what you should do and focus on. It's really not a focus on the technology that's important. It's actually focus on the customer and the problem that they're experiencing that is important. So with that, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Also, do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.